Qin Mu learned from Shan Yuxin that the key to the Heavenly Devil cult's treasure vault on Saint Arrival Mountain was kept by the Saintess Si Yunxiang of the Si family. Since the Si family controlled all of the cult's finances and managed every piece of its property, no treasures could be taken from the treasury without the Saintess's approval. Shan Yuxin explained that if Qin Mu wished to refine his planned sword pellet from 8,000 flying swords, the treasury contained more than enough rare materials and the manufacturing factory could forge them quickly. But obtaining the key from Si Yunxiang was essential. Qin Mu therefore went to see the Saintess. When she heard that he intended to forge a sword pellet composed of 8,000 swords, she was astonished and immediately questioned whether he could even lift such a weapon. Qin Mu's expression darkened because he had already begun worrying that the completed sword pellet might indeed be too heavy for him to use. Si Yunxiang smiled after noticing his reaction. She admitted that as the cult master, Qin Mu naturally had the right to use the sacred cult's materials to refine his own spirit weapon. But she reminded him that those treasures had been accumulated by countless generations of disciples. Since the cult had spent enormous sums on disaster relief, the treasury was now nearly empty of money. If another crisis occurred, the cult would face serious financial difficulties. Understanding her concern, Qin Mu immediately offered to donate the 1 million Great Abundance coins he still possessed to the Heavenly Devil cult so the funds could be used whenever emergencies arose. Si Yunxiang happily accepted the donation, but she pointed out that 1 million coins distributed among 1 million disciples would amount to only 1 coin per disciple. Since Qin Mu was forging a new weapon for himself, she casually suggested that he would no longer need the Junior Protector sword. Although Qin Mu realized she was trying to strip him of his valuables, he reluctantly handed the sword over. Seeing how cooperative he had become, Si Yunxiang continued persuading him to contribute more treasures to replenish the treasury. She reminded him that the 1,000 Banners pagoda and several other treasures inside his Teodi sack could also be stored in the cult's vault. Qin Mu took out the 1,000 Banners pagoda and the burnt guqin, but suddenly became suspicious. He pointed out that he was only refining a 6 Directions realm spirit weapon. Yet she was asking him to surrender treasures worthy of a cult master, whose value far exceeded what he was receiving. He accused her of trying to deceive him. Si Yunxiang calmly replied that the materials Qin Mu intended to use from the treasury were valuable enough to refine dozens of cult master-level treasures. Since he planned to consume such an enormous quantity of the sacred cult's resources for a single sword pellet, it was only reasonable for him to replenish the treasury with treasures of equal value. After considering her explanation, Qin Mu admitted her logic was difficult to refute. Since the treasures had originally been stolen from Roland's Golden Palace rather than earned through his own efforts, he reluctantly handed over every cult master-level treasure in his possession. Si Yunxiang was still not satisfied. Her eyes lit up as she remembered the 3,000 luminous star pearls Qin Mu had taken from the East Sea Shrine and asked him to hand those over as well. Qin Mu protested that those pearls were almost everything he had left. Smiling sweetly, Si Yunxiang argued that she was not taking them for herself but merely storing them safely in the sacred cult's treasury. Although the Si family managed the finances, they could only guard the treasures rather than use them personally. So everything in the treasury still belonged to Qin Mu as the cult master. Qin Mu felt that her reasoning sounded perfectly reasonable, yet somehow still sensed he was being cheated. In the end, he sighed and reluctantly surrendered all 3,000 luminous pearls. Si Yunxiang then secretly glanced toward his Teodi sack and asked about the pair of enormous eyeballs stored inside. Qin Mu's face immediately darkened, and he firmly refused, even feeling an urge to kill if she continued asking. She then jokingly wondered whether she could take away his dragon qilin instead. Qin Mu immediately relaxed and laughed, saying that she was welcome to take the beast if she was willing to feed him. Si Yunxiang burst into laughter and admitted she was only teasing him. She said even Patriarch Si disliked the dragon qilin because it consumed far too much food. After she left to arrange the transportation of materials, Qin Mu looked at his almost empty Teodi sack and felt as though he had been completely stripped naked by the young saintess. He secretly vowed that in the future he would let Hu Linger manage all financial matters because Si Yunxiang was simply too skilled at extracting wealth from others. Si Yunxiang then took out a magical bronze mirror and contacted the great-grandmother of the Si family. Through the mirror she explained that the cult master intended to refine a sword pellet from 8,000 swords and requested the highest quality materials from the treasury to be transported to the manufacturing factory in Mil Prefecture. The elderly matriarch frowned and refused at first, insisting that the Si family never conducted business at a loss. She argued that Qin Mu was still young. His cultivation was relatively low, and there was no need for him to waste the treasury's finest materials. Without saying a word, Si Yunxiang displayed every treasure she had just obtained from Qin Mu. The old woman's eyes immediately shone with delight. She praised Si Yunxiang for her extraordinary talent in managing wealth and declared that she had truly inherited the financial abilities of the Si family. She contrasted her with Granny Si, criticizing Granny Si for spending money extravagantly without caring about costs, always purchasing the most expensive items regardless of necessity. The great-grandmother then explained the condition of the treasury. The finest sword refining materials were unimaginably heavy, with even a thumb-sized piece weighing dozens of pounds. Furthermore, the amount available was far too small to forge 8,000 swords. The highest grade materials were only sufficient to forge about 27 cult master-level swords, each weighing around 10,000 pounds. Materials one grade lower could at best produce 100 swords. Only another grade lower, winter iron essence, black gold essence, and black copper essence, existed in quantities sufficient to forge all 8,000 swords. After considering this, Si Yunxiang instructed her great-grandmother to send every piece of the highest grade materials, all of the second-grade materials, and use black gold essence to make up the remaining quantity. She wanted the finest materials concentrated along the cutting edges of the swords while the rest of the blades would be forged from black gold essence. The old woman found this strange because winter iron essence was 3 times lighter than black gold essence and asked why Si Yunxiang deliberately chose the heavier material. Si Yunxiang merely smiled without answering. The elder immediately understood that the girl was being mischievous and jokingly warned that Qin Mu might end up unable to lift his finished sword pellet and might even punish her for making it so heavy. She promised to prepare everything and instructed Si Yunxiang to have Fan Yunxiao bring his flying ship to transport the cargo from Saint Arrival Mountain. 2 days later, Fan Yunxiao arrived with an enormous shipment of refining materials, and the manufacturing factory in Mil Prefecture immediately resumed operation. Forging the sword embryos was relatively straightforward because only the initial shape of the blades had to be formed. However, every sword embryo still required more than 1,000 rounds of repeated hammering, folding, refining, and recasting before reaching the required quality. Even after the embryos were completed, they still resembled flat iron clubs rather than swords. Qin Mu personally performed the delicate work of grinding, reshaping, refining, and polishing every single blade. When he finally lifted one completed sword, his expression immediately darkened because each sword weighed around 300 pounds. 2 or 3 times heavier than he had expected. Calculating the combined weight of 8,000 such swords, he realized the completed sword pellet would possess an almost unimaginable mass. Si Yunxiang cheerfully explained that the superior materials she had selected naturally made the swords much heavier. But they would also be incomparably sharper, stronger, and more durable than even the treasured swords awarded by the emperor to his highest-ranking officials. Laughing, she joked that Qin Mu would not even need sword techniques because simply throwing such an enormous sword pellet would crush countless enemies to death. Qin Mu gloomily replied that such a plan required him to be capable of lifting it in the first place. Si Yunxiang encouraged him by saying she had heard that artifacts refined to their highest perfection could freely change their weight according to their master's will. Since Qin Mu possessed extraordinary refining skills, she believed he would certainly achieve such a miraculous level. Qin Mu muttered to himself about his 100 creation 100 forge divine transformation technique and his need for strength capable of moving mountains before returning to work. Shan Yuxin originally wished to remain and watch Qin Mu complete the sword pellet. But Crown Prince Ling Yushu still needed to oversee reconstruction efforts throughout the remaining prefectures. Before departing, he instructed the disciples of Heavenly Crafts Hall to stay behind and assist Qin Mu. Even with numerous helpers, refining all 8,000 swords remained a project of astonishing scale. Because Si Yunxiang had intentionally chosen exceptionally high-quality materials, every blade required tremendous effort before it could freely enlarge or shrink as desired. Qin Mu also had to engrave complex spirit markings and countless runes onto every sword individually. Months passed in relentless labor, leaving Qin Mu noticeably thinner from exhaustion. Throughout this period, Ling Yushou and Si Yunxiang remained beside him helping with the work. Under Qin Mu's guidance, both women learned numerous advanced forging techniques and used the opportunity to strengthen their own treasures. 9 dragons and 1,000 silks, by incorporating superior refining materials. Eventually Qin Mu completed 7,999 swords. Only the final mother sword remained. Unlike the child swords, the mother sword had to be forged from the finest possible material because it alone would command and unite all 7,999 subordinate swords into a single sword pellet. Qin Mu devoted extraordinary care to this final weapon. He had reserved a mysterious fist-sized piece of unknown metal that Si Yunxiang said had fallen from outer space. Despite being no larger than a fist, it weighed approximately 10,000 pounds. Even so, the precious metal was sufficient only to forge the blade itself rather than the entire mother sword. Qin Mu therefore took out the mysterious broken sword he had obtained from Roland's golden palace. The only treasure Si Yunxiang had overlooked because it appeared to be nothing more than a useless fragment. Holding the broken sword in one hand and the mysterious metal in the other, Qin Mu suddenly discovered that they were irresistibly attracted toward each other. They collided with a loud clang, causing brilliant golden light to erupt from both objects. Endless streams of sword qi flowed through the air around Qin Mu, revolving in circles centered on his body. The dazzling radiance illuminated every corner of the manufacturing factory and even burst through its doors and windows. The broken sword and the mysterious metal repeatedly crashed together again and again. Every collision sent violent vibrations through Qin Mu's arm until it became numb. After countless impacts, the fist-sized metal suddenly crumbled into ashes. At the same time, the broken sword absorbed every trace of golden qi released by the mysterious metal. Before Qin Mu's astonished eyes, the once shattered blade completely regenerated, restoring itself into a flawless, complete divine sword. Strange dragon-like and snake-like markings began moving across the blade, alternately glowing and fading. During one brief moment, those shifting markings clearly assembled themselves into a single word that Qin Mu unmistakably recognized: Carefree. Qin Mu was startled when he saw the word, Carefree, briefly emerge from the flowing markings on the restored sword. When he looked again, the word had disappeared as though it had never existed. Yet he was certain it had not been an illusion. This made him wonder whether the restored sword, called Carefree Sword, was connected to Carefree Village. He questioned how such a sword had been broken in the first place, why it had returned to its original form only after touching the mysterious divine metal, and whether all of these events had been arranged by fate. The broken sword had fallen into the hands of Roland's golden palace. The divine metal had entered the heavenly saint cult's treasury. He had stolen the sword from Roland's golden palace, and he had happened to place it beside the metal, causing the two pieces to reunite. Qin Mu felt that so many coincidences could not simply be chance and believed that some invisible power had orchestrated everything. Wanting answers, Qin Mu asked Si Yunxiang whether the mysterious metal truly came from outer space and when it had arrived. Still shocked by the sword's transformation, Si Yunxiang admitted she did not know the exact history and contacted the Si family's great-grandmother through her bronze mirror. After searching through ancient records, the old woman returned with a book and explained that the divine metal had indeed fallen from outer space 16 years earlier. During the winter of that year, a streak of divine light crossed the sky and landed inside Ghost Valley. Heavenly Saint cult disciples immediately rushed to investigate and found dozens of corpses at the site. They recovered only the strange piece of divine metal and deposited it in the cult's treasure vault as a precious artifact. The mention of 16 years immediately caught Qin Mu's attention because Granny Si had found and raised him 15 years earlier, meaning the appearance of the divine metal had occurred almost at the same time as his own mysterious arrival. Realizing the connection, Qin Mu urgently asked whether people from Roland's Golden Palace had also been present in Ghost Valley during that incident. The Si family's great-grandmother was surprised that he knew about it and explained that Ghost Valley lay behind the Duktung Zone near Qingmen Pass, directly bordering the barbarian D Empire. At that time, Heavenly Saint cult disciples had been stationed at Qingmen Pass. After witnessing the descending divine light, they entered Ghost Valley to investigate. However, the great shamans and shaman kings of Roland's Golden Palace, who were guarding the barbarian D border, had also seen the light and entered Ghost Valley from the opposite direction. The struggle inside Ghost Valley was extremely fierce. Heavenly Saint cult lost a hall master together with dozens of divine arts practitioners. While Roland's Golden Palace also suffered devastating casualties. Neither side managed to fully explore Ghost Valley because of the overwhelming danger within, forcing both to retreat. Before withdrawing, Heavenly Saint cult recovered the strange divine metal, while Roland's Golden Palace appeared to have obtained only a broken sword. Hearing this, Qin Mu immediately understood the truth. The broken sword and the divine metal had originally been a single treasure before somehow separating during the events 16 years earlier. The Heavenly Saint cult had unknowingly preserved the divine metal, while Roland's Golden Palace had unknowingly kept the broken sword. Once Qin Mu reunited them, the sword naturally restored itself into its complete form. Realizing that Ghost Valley contained the origin of both treasures, Qin Mu resolved to investigate it personally. The Xi family's great-grandmother warned him that Ghost Valley remained an extremely dangerous place. Even after several later expeditions, Heavenly Saint cult disciples had never been able to venture far into its depths because of the countless hidden dangers. After thanking the old woman, Qin Mu turned back to see Yunxiang. She glanced repeatedly at Carefree's sword, making Qin Mu immediately tighten his grip on it and warn her that it was the indispensable mother sword of his sword pellet, so he could never give it away. Si Yunxiang laughed and replied that she had no intention of taking it. She merely wondered whether he could still complete the sword pellet after investing so much effort into forging thousands of flying swords. Qin Mu confidently explained the theory behind a sword pellet. Since a sword pellet was literally a spherical mass formed by thousands of swords, every sword hilt had to become one tiny segment of a perfectly round sphere. Each section had to match every other section with incredible precision, accurate down to the almost immeasurable mohu digits. He proudly declared that calculations had always been his greatest strength, causing both Ling Yusho and Si Yunxiang to pout in disbelief. Qin Mu then activated Carefree's sword with his vital qi. The restored mother sword instantly resonated with all of the child swords, and countless flying swords shot toward him. Brilliant sword lights filled the entire Heavenly Crafts Hall workshop as thousands of swords rushed through the air. Qin Mu continuously vibrated the mother sword, causing the flying swords to collide with it one after another before disappearing. However, as more swords connected, the combined weight became unimaginably terrifying. His face quickly turned red, his muscles trembled violently, and his body struggled to endure the enormous pressure. The stone slab beneath his feet shattered apart, his shoes were crushed, and the overwhelming weight forced him directly underground. In an instant, he disappeared into a huge pit while the flying swords continued crashing downward after him. Ling Yusho and Si Yunxiang were alarmed and immediately called for help. The disciples of Heavenly Crafts Hall rushed over and heard continuous rumbling from beneath the ground. Qin Mu was still being pushed downward by the immense weight of the unfinished sword pellet and had already sunk nearly 15 yards beneath the surface. As everyone prepared to excavate the pit to rescue him, Qin Mu's muffled voice emerged from underground, assuring everyone that he was safe but warning them to move away because the sword was simply too heavy. The crowd quickly retreated. Suddenly, thousands of flying swords burst out of the enormous hole like a fountain erupting from underground. The 8,000 swords flew into the sky before stabbing themselves into the earth one after another, their hilts trembling continuously. Moments later, Qin Mu jumped back out of the pit. Although he landed safely, his legs continued shaking violently and his complexion remained pale from exhaustion. Determined not to repeat his mistake, Qin Mu climbed onto a massive pile of black iron blocks inside the workshop and pointed Carefree's sword downward before summoning the child swords again. The 8,000 flying swords gathered together and assembled into a gigantic spherical sword pellet. Exactly as Qin Mu had predicted, the curved hilts of every sword combined to form a nearly perfect sphere, with only insignificant mohu level deviations remaining. However, the completed sword pellet was astonishingly large, possessing a radius of 6 yards. Ling Yusho walked around the enormous sphere in amazement, admitting she had never seen such an enormous sword pellet. Qin Mu then shouted for it to shrink. Under the influence of his magic power, the massive sphere gradually compressed, even after shrinking to its smallest limit. However, it still measured 3 feet in radius. Qin Mu had already pushed his vital qi to its absolute limit. His face was flushed from holding his breath. Yet he could not reduce its size any further. He explained that although each individual flying sword could shrink to only an inch long, 8,000 swords together still occupied too much space. Since they had only recently been forged, they still required prolonged nourishment and repeated refinement. Once refined until every sword became as delicate and thin as natural silk, the entire sword pellet could eventually compress into something no larger than a pigeon's egg. Without resting, Qin Mu demonstrated another refinement method. Holding Carefree sword firmly with both hands, he spun the mother sword. The remaining 7,999 child swords expanded outward into a perfect circular formation, each sword pointing toward the center. Qin Mu then activated Carefree sword again. One after another, the child swords flew toward it, colliding with the mother sword before vanishing inside. As the process continued, the collisions became increasingly rapid until more and more swords disappeared. Everyone watching was astonished because Qin Mu was successfully combining two completely different sword pellet refinement techniques. The first traditional method arranged all the swords into a spherical formation, requiring extraordinary mathematical calculations but allowing sword formations and sword techniques to be unleashed with exceptional speed. The second method, favored by southern sword sects, stored all child swords inside a highly flexible mother sword. This allowed the mother sword to channel the combined power of every child sword, greatly increasing its offensive strength while requiring far less mathematical precision. Normally, sword cultivators could only choose one refinement method because the two systems were fundamentally incompatible. Yet Qin Mu had successfully merged both methods into a single sword pellet, creating something few people had ever imagined possible. Watching this, Si Yunxiang sighed with admiration and remarked that Qin Mu truly deserved his title as the second greatest weapon refiner in the world. She could not help wondering how extraordinary the techniques of the legendary number 1 weapon refiner must be if Qin Mu himself was only ranked second. Eventually, after absorbing slightly more than 2,000 child swords into the mother sword, Qin Mu's vital qi was completely exhausted. Unable to continue, he released the remaining swords and opened his peyote sack. Thousands of flying swords immediately streamed into the storage bag like schools of fish. Although the sword pellet had finally been completed, Qin Mu could not yet wield it properly. Even its smallest compressed form remained far too large and far too heavy for practical use. Ling Yusho secretly laughed and admitted she no longer envied Qin Mu's sword pellet. Although it was an extraordinary spirit weapon, it was too massive for him to use effectively. Si Yunxiang nodded in agreement, commenting that even if Qin Mu managed to lift it, he would probably exhaust all of his vital qi after only a few attacks. Qin Mu hung the peyote sack back onto his belt, only to discover that although the bag reduced magnetic force, it could not completely eliminate it because it was not made from genuine peyote hide. The remaining magnetic attraction caused the sack full of flying swords to weigh nearly 100 pounds. Dragging his trousers downward, with an irritated expression, Qin Mu removed the bag, found golden thread, and fashioned 2 shoulder straps so he could carry the peyote sack like a backpack instead of attaching it to his waist. Just then, a loud smack echoed through the workshop. Qin Mu had secretly slapped Si Yunxiang on the buttocks while no one was paying attention. Knowing she had intentionally altered the refining materials to make all 8,000 flying swords much heavier than normal, Si Yunxiang's face instantly flushed red as she rubbed her sore backside in embarrassment. Ling Yusho noticed only Si Yunxiang's strange reaction and remained completely unaware of what had happened. Changing the subject, Ling Yusho reminded Qin Mu that her elder brother, the crown prince, had already been gone for several months and had probably reached the southern frontier by then. She asked whether they still intended to pursue him. Qin Mu shook his head and said he had changed his plans. Since Qingmen Pass lay near Great Thunderclap Monastery and Ghost Valley was located nearby, he would postpone chasing the crown prince and instead travel to Ghost Valley to investigate the mystery surrounding Carefree sword, the divine metal, and the events that had occurred there 16 years earlier. Ling Yusho questioned Qin Mu's decision to visit Ghost Valley, reminding him that the old matriarch of the Sea family had once said the place was extremely dangerous. Even the heavenly saint cult's experts and the great shamans and shaman kings of Roland Golden Palace had suffered devastating casualties while exploring it. Qin Mu remained determined, explaining that Ghost Valley might be connected to the mystery of his birth. Because of that possibility, He had to investigate it no matter how dangerous it was. He emphasized that this was his own personal matter and had nothing to do with the Heavenly Saint cult or with Ling Yusho and Si Yunxiang. So he intended to go alone. Qin Mu walked out of the Heavenly Crafts Hall and summoned the dragon Qilin, who had been sleeping outside. The dragon Qilin immediately woke up and, still half asleep, asked whether it was already the next day and whether it was time to eat. Qin Mu scolded him for thinking only about sleeping and eating, then mounted his back and ordered him to head toward Qingmen Pass. As they flew away on fire clouds, the dragon Qilin commented that Qin Mu had become 200 pounds heavier than before. Qin Mu angrily denied it, saying he had actually become thinner after spending days forging swords and that the swords in his sack weighed only around 100 pounds. He accused the dragon Qilin of being the one who had truly grown fatter. Ling Yusho and Si Yunxiang rushed outside but could only watch as Qin Mu disappeared into the distance. Si Yunxiang frowned and remarked that Qin Mu was far too reckless. Even if he insisted on entering Ghost Valley, he should at least have prepared properly instead of charging in carelessly while underestimating the valley's dangers. She rubbed her still painful buttocks, remembering the slap Qin Mu had given her, then comforted herself by saying that Heavenly Kings Yu and Shi had been secretly protecting Qin Mu ever since Long Jiaonan kidnapped them. So they would probably intervene if he truly encountered danger. After a moment, Si Yunxiang suddenly sighed and jokingly lamented that if the cult master died inside Ghost Valley, the saintess would naturally inherit his position. She regretted not accompanying him because, had she gone along, she could have ensured he died there. Ling Yusho immediately became furious and warned Si Yunxiang that if she dared lay a hand on Qin Mu, she would break both of her legs. Si Yunxiang laughed and called Ling Yusho a little hussy, saying she had long considered her a thorn in her side. Ling Yusho's large figure constantly stayed beside Qin Mu and ruined every opportunity Si Yunxiang had to make a move against him. The two girls glared at one another before deliberately turning their backs. However, neither intended to let the matter end peacefully. Si Yunxiang secretly spread her 1,000 silks beneath the ground like countless spirit snakes, silently creeping toward Ling Yusho. At the same time, Ling Yusho's 9 dragons' weapons quietly came alive. Their dragon scales shifted, sharp blades extended from their claws, and the dragon-shaped spirit weapons silently surrounded Si Yunxiang. The two attacked simultaneously. Si Yunxiang's 1,000 silks instantly sliced apart Ling Yusho's dress, narrowly missing her body and almost reducing her to pieces. Si Yunxiang floated gracefully through the air like a butterfly, avoiding the combined assault of the 9 dragon weapons. Ling Yusho continuously flipped backward before striking the ground with her palm. Tremendous magical power erupted, shaking the earth as countless stone pillars burst upward beneath Si Yunxiang and forced her into the sky. Ling Yusho immediately followed, seized the 9 dragons' hammer, gathered lightning and flames around it, and smashed downward with overwhelming force while shouting that she would definitely break Si Yunxiang's legs. Si Yunxiang laughed without fear as 1,000 silks suddenly shot toward Ling Yusho's back. The countless silver sword threads spread apart into extremely fine snakes and slashed toward Ling Yusho's neck. She mocked Ling Yusho, asking whether her strength even compared to Fazi's, before declaring she would cut off Ling Yusho's head first. The Heavenly Crafts Hall disciples emerged after hearing the commotion and watched the fierce battle unfolding high in the sky. They witnessed Ling Yusho smashing Si Yunxiang toward the ground, then saw Si Yunxiang vanish and suddenly reappear behind the princess, striking her so hard that Ling Yusho coughed up blood. Unsure whether to interfere, they looked toward one another until an incense master advised them not to become involved. He explained that this was a matter of jealousy concerning the cult master. Helping either woman would only offend the other and leave them unable to explain themselves to Qin Mu later. Everyone agreed, pretended they had seen nothing, and quietly walked away. Meanwhile, the dragon Qilin carried Qin Mu northward and reached Qingmen Pass by evening. Qin Mu found the atmosphere unusually tense. Commander Bian Junyun, an old acquaintance, personally came to receive him and asked why he had come. Qin Mu explained that he intended to visit Ghost Valley but, since darkness had already fallen over great ruins, he planned to stay one night inside Qingmen Pass before continuing the next morning. He then asked about the military situation. Bian Junyun's expression turned grave. Over the past several months, Barbarian D Empire had continuously increased its military strength along the border. More and more powerful cultivators from Roland Golden Palace had appeared, and intelligence suggested that Barbarian D's envoys had secretly returned to the grasslands. Everything indicated that the empire intended to launch a large-scale invasion of eternal peace while the kingdom remained weakened. Bian Junyun had also noticed suspicious figures resembling people from Wolfstore country appearing beyond the border. While barbarian cavalry scouts had become increasingly bold, frequently patrolling between the two frontiers, he feared war was approaching. Although he had already dispatched urgent reports to the emperor, Qingmen Pass alone lacked sufficient military strength to resist a full invasion. He sincerely wished to send experts to escort Qin Mu to Ghost Valley but admitted that he could not spare a single capable soldier under the current circumstances. Qin Mu assured him that national defense came first and that there was no need to worry about his safety. Since Ghost Valley lay within great ruins rather than the prairie, he expected no conflict with the barbarian forces. That night he looked toward the enemy camp over 100 miles away and saw brilliant rays of light illuminating the darkness like daylight, demonstrating the enormous scale of the barbarian encampment. At dawn Qin Mu washed, ate breakfast, fed the dragon Qilin, and departed. Bian Junyun escorted him to the gate and explained that he could go no farther because leaving the pass might invite an enemy attack. Instead, he ordered mounted scouts riding various strange beasts to secretly follow Qin Mu from a distance and provide protection. Qin Mu crossed toward Duktung Zone, the buffer region between Eternal Peace and Barbarian D Empire. Scouts from both sides soon discovered one another and almost simultaneously launched attacks. Sword pellets and blade pellets filled the sky, colliding violently. Eternal Peace's mounted scouts then uncorked several bottle gourds, instantly releasing enormous clouds that spread across more than 10 miles and reduced visibility to only about 30 yards. Both sides immediately lost sight of each other, and an eerie silence settled over the battlefield. Using his green heaven's eyes, Qin Mu saw clearly through the dense fog while the dragon Qilin quietly crossed Duktung Zone. Qin Mu reflected that Emperor Yangfeng had accepted his earlier advice to preserve clouds and lightning as strategic military weapons. Such methods would greatly strengthen Qingmen Pass and make it much more difficult for Barbarian D Empire to break through the defenses despite its superior numbers. Duktung Zone stretched for nearly 8,000 miles until Great Ruins. Once inside Great Ruins, Qin Mu carefully observed the surroundings for ruins or stone statues that could provide shelter if night arrived before he returned. However, the region was unnaturally silent. There were no birds, no beasts, and no signs of life whatsoever. Qin Mu understood that such silence meant the area contained no safe refuge, because even the strange beasts native to Great Ruins avoided remaining there after dark. He passed a perfectly still sapphire blue lake whose surface lacked even the slightest ripple. There were neither fish nor shrimp within it, making it nothing more than a dead lake. Qin Mu judged that even the lake offered no protection against the darkness and continued onward. Without realizing it, he and the dragon Qilin gradually entered increasingly steep mountains before reaching an extraordinary ravine. Trees grew in every direction, many extending horizontally from the cliffs instead of vertically from the ground. Their branches completely covered the sky, making it seem as though the entire world had been turned upside down and the cliff faces had become the ground itself. The ancient trees were unimaginably huge, requiring dozens of people to embrace their trunks. Their roots twisted together like giant dragons, and beneath them glowed ghostly phosphorescent lights. Massive skeletons of unknown creatures rested among those roots. Strangely, both the corpses and the bones remained attached to the cliffs rather than lying at the bottom of the ravine. Even fallen leaves drifted sideways and settled upon the cliff walls instead of falling downward, leaving the ravine floor perfectly clean. The dragon Qilin accidentally collided with a floating boulder. The rock merely spun in place before remaining suspended in midair. Looking farther ahead, Qin Mu saw countless rocks floating throughout the ravine. The dragon Qilin quietly asked whether they had entered Ghost Valley. Qin Mu nodded but admitted that the complete absence of living creatures made him feel deeply uneasy. Just then, voices drifted through the forest. Invisible speakers argued about the best method of cooking humans. One insisted that humans tasted best when roasted over fire until the fat dripped down and the meat remained tender inside. The other argued that lightly roasting away the hair before eating them nearly raw preserved the freshest flavor. While debating, one suddenly noticed someone approaching and warned the other to remain silent. Realizing danger was nearby, Qin Mu immediately used Mars' Fire Marquee True technique to transform into the appearance of Mars' sovereign before riding the dragon Qilin toward the source of the voices. When they arrived, he found no speakers. Instead, there was only a large bonfire where a great shaman from Roland Golden Palace was tied up and being roasted alive. Although the great shaman possessed profound cultivation and had not yet died, all of his strength had been exhausted by the torture. He weakly opened his eyes and glanced at Qin Mu. Suddenly 2 enormous white-furred bats descended upside down from the trees. Their bodies were extraordinarily muscular. Their arms crossed confidently over their chests, and white flames seemed to burn inside their glowing eyes. Qin Mu immediately realized these creatures were terrifying variants. Their demonic aura had completely vanished, replaced by an overwhelming divine or devilish aura, indicating they were descendants of gods or devils. One bat looked at Qin Mu and the dragon Qilin before disappointedly declaring that neither of them was human, ruining their expectations of another meal. The other agreed, saying it had hoped more humans had arrived. Qin Mu politely greeted them as fellow Dao practitioners. The bats responded politely but warned that the roasting great shaman was their own prey and that Qin Mu should capture his own humans because several more had recently entered the valley. Qin Mu smiled and claimed that he had been a vegetarian since birth, causing the bats to relax completely. He then asked whether Ghost Valley was safe to remain in during the night. One bat replied that, since Qin Mu was unfamiliar with the valley, it was understandable that he would ask, then assured him that the valley itself was perfectly safe to stay in. Qin Mu thanked them with obvious relief. The bats shrank back beside the bonfire and patiently waited for the great shaman to finish roasting. As they watched the fire, one bat remarked that the dragon Qilin carried the bloodline of Mars, making him a poor choice for food, whereas humans were always the most delicious because they were tender and juicy. The other bat laughed and replied that there was no need to attack Qin Mu directly because anyone entering Ghost Valley would soon discover just how treacherous the valley truly was.